Welcome to This Day Live, the Sunday talk show here on the Arise News channels. With me are Professor Bola Akinterinwa, Professor of International Relations at the Achievers University in Ondo State, Professor David Awarawo, Professor of International Relations and Strategic Studies at the University of Lagos, and Yemi Adamolekun, Executive Director, Enough is Enough. Well, ladies and gentlemen, good to see you both, and thanks for your time. Well, let's quickly delve into what the issues are. But again, quickly here, remember it was a sad past week for Nigeria with the death of at least 20 of her soldiers in the hands of terrorists who laid an ambush for them in Niger State in the north central. The soldiers were on board a Nigerian Air Force helicopter on an evacuation mission when it crashed. A statement from Nigeria Air Force Commodore Edward Gapquet, spokesperson, confirmed that the aircraft had departed Zungeru Primary School en route nearby Kaduna, but was later discovered to have crashed near Chukuba village in Shiroro local government area of Niger State. The spokesperson said efforts were ongoing to rescue the crew and passengers on board the helicopter while investigations began. We also have the story of Niger's military ruler, General Abdurrahman Chiani, who's said that there's already a transition of power in progress, which will not go beyond 3 years, and has also warned that any attack on the country would not be easy for those involved. He said that his mission was not to seize power, even as he warned the West African regional bloc that an attack on Niger would not be a walk in the park. His warning came a day after ECOWAS declared its readiness for armed intervention to restore democratic order in Niger. Let's pause now for these two and quickly get back to the Lagos studios and have my guest analyst speak to us on this. Let's start with you, Professor Awarawo. The issue of security has again come to the fore. Before we get to Niger, there seemed to be some kind of resurgence, and of course, since after the elections, the bandits seem to have regrouped and formed some crazy alliance against the Nigerian state. What do you think the country isn't perhaps getting right at the moment?
Thank you very much, Suleiman. What I think the country is not getting right is the appropriate strategy to combat these terrorists and insurgents. There are different strategies to combat, when you're fighting a conventional war and as compared with when you're fighting insurgents. I think the major issue revolves around adopting the appropriate strategy to deal with these terrorists and insurgents. And of course, we also have the issue of not having enough, material to be able to prosecute. Sometimes these terrorists have, weapons that are more sophisticated than those who are fighting them, and that is a huge disadvantage. And when you are fighting terrorists, the local population is very critical. I'm not sure that the Nigerian authorities fighting the terrorists have enough, understanding and trust of the local population. That has been a major issue. In fact, struggling to win the confidence of the local population is key to being able to successfully fight insurgents and terrorists. So these are the things I think are lacking, which is why the terrorists have, achieved as much as they have in terms of troubling the population and troubling the Nigerian state as they have. And these are things that the Nigerian government will need to address moving forward to be able to successfully tackle these terrorists and insurgents. On the issue of Niger, I've said it several times. I think ECOWAS leaders made a mistake to talk about the possibility of military intervention, because the intervention, the consequences will be too catastrophic to contemplate. It will be like replicating Russia, Ukraine in West Africa, where Russia will support those who are there now, the coup plotters, and those who are supporting Burkina Faso, Mali, and Guinea. And then the West supporting ECOWAS, 10 states that have decided to carry out this military engagement should President Bazoum not be reinstated. Of course, the 10 is not actually 10, maybe 6. There are 4 or so that are lukewarm. So it will be like ECOWAS fighting itself, ECOWAS against itself. So it could lead to the even implosion of ECOWAS. What about Nigeria itself? There could be implosion in Nigeria. People in the northwest, in the north generally, do not support it. People even in the east, southeast, are saying they will join Niger to fight the Nigerian state for them to actualize Biafra. These are two, intricate issues for us to be talking about invasion. And if ECOWAS does not invade, as it has done, in deterrence theory, there's what we call credibility. It will have lost credibility. So moving forward, if he says, if you do this, we will do this, I mean, nobody will take ECOWAS seriously. So ECOWAS is in a conundrum in deciding that they would invade. They should have just gone the way they have gone formally, negotiate and then sanction so you could get a shorter period for transition. Like I said several times as well, I do not see those guys letting Bazoum return to office while they quit. That will not likely happen. At the end of the day, transition will still be the thing that will take place, which is what ECOWAS should have focused on in the first place. If they decide to invade, another thing is that they put Bazoum and his family in danger. They might just kill them. And if they kill them, what will ECOWAS do? Who will ECOWAS install if they even defeat the Nigerians? The issues are just too complicated and intricate. So the decision to talk about invasion, military engagement in the first place was a mistake. But you can always correct your mistake. If you are seeking the absolute good, which is not realizable, you settle for the lesser evil. Let them negotiate. 3 years is too long. Negotiate to get a shorter transition. Negotiate the release of Bazoum and his family. And then we can move on from there. And then ECOWAS can be saved, West Africa can be saved. Then diplomacy will continue to push ahead and everybody will be fine. I mean, all these countries are, somebody has said that a man whose house is on fire does not go chasing rats. Joke is a joke, war is war. War is not a joke. Those are my thoughts on the. It's good that they have talked about 3 years. We should negotiate to reduce that time substantially, and Niger can transit to democratic governance, and then stability can be restored. Yeah, and we can all move on from there.
Yeah, let's move on and talk more about Niger. But again, before that, I also want the thoughts of everyone. Let me go to. Yemi Adamolekun, let's start off by talking about the very unfortunate incident with the involved in the Nigeria Air Force. And you heard Professor Awara was saying that it looks as if we're dropping the ball. It looks like an insurgent that seemed to be gaining more traction in this push. Speak to us on what you think now that we have new service chiefs in place. What should the country be expecting of the dynamic team that President Tinubu seemed to have brought on board?
Good afternoon, Suleiman. I guess you are the one defining them as a dynamic team. And so I'm not quite sure what your parameters are, so I won't speak to that. But I think the issues have remained the same, quite frankly. I mean, our service chiefs are members of the armed forces, so they're not new people. They've been part of the system. Unless I've missed it, I don't know that I've heard of any sort of fundamental institutional structural changes with the way they're operating. So I'm not quite sure why we would expect different results, so to speak. And I think maybe the parallel to that is we're talking about Niger State. At the same time, we're talking about Niger as a country that we seem to think we have not only the manpower, but the moral gravitas to want to attack. Whereas in Niger State, we had our members of our armed forces attacked because the plane was flying low, because we have bandits who have weapons that are able to do that. And so with the same kind of patterns, I mean, I think this probably happened 3 or 4 times under President Buhari's administration in dealing in different states where you had bandits who were able to take down aircrafts or ambush members of our armed forces. So I think my points are the fact that it's nothing new, and the fact that we appointed new human beings to head same structures I'm not quite sure what that means in terms of suddenly things will be run differently. And then especially when the same structure is in discussions to take out external forces, or in a sense engage in external aggression. So yeah, I'm not expecting anything different. It's unfortunate what we have, but I think maybe one thing I will say that was different is a quick response by the presidency. There was an immediate statement. Under Buhari, we might have waited 2 weeks for anybody to acknowledge anything happened. So maybe that's something we can talk about, or something we can acknowledge. And to Niger, I think more broadly, Ambassador Keshi said very clearly, and I think maybe contradictory to what Professor Awurawa just said, that once you have a coup, the regime of the democratically elected or the former military governor or former military administration, whichever administration was overturned, that administration is then over. And even if ECOWAS might try to negotiate to bring Bazoum back when they start negotiating, I'm not quite sure it's what the Nigerian army would want, because that's the whole premise of their coup. They don't want or didn't think Bazoum was working properly or serving the people appropriately. So I think it will be counterintuitive for them to accept him coming back as part of a negotiation. And if we look at it broadly, we need to then start thinking about the cost of yet another election within, 2 years, depending on when this negotiation, we finally make peace with this negotiation. But I do agree with the points that Professor Awurawa raised in terms of what this really means, sort of the ripple effect of if ECOWAS does go ahead. And I think the best summary I like for what he said was that this is basically will be a case of ECOWAS fighting itself.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, yes, before I go to Professor Akinterinwa, yes, dynamic in the sense that they were positive. Perhaps, yes, you can also be very positive. And they showed that positive attitude when they were appointed. So, Professor Akinterinwa, you know, some of the concerns here everyone has raised has to do with looking at, you know, a very tight situation. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. That's the situation. Listening to Professor Awurawa. So what should ECOWAS do now? It seemed that the very last option was brought forward before any other thing, and now ECOWAS seem to be caught in a fix. Speak to us on the way out of this imbroglio in Niger.
Yeah, thank you, Suleiman. Well, let me give a prelude to what I think the ECOWAS should be doing by first of all asking a question for all of us to look into. Is it possible to have an enemy within and expect to go out and fight a war and win? What I simply mean is that the Yoruba proverbial saying has it that the enemy is within, not without, not outside. Right from the time of Goodluck Jonathan as President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, he did tell us openly that there were Boko Haramis in his government. In whichever way you want to interpret government, whether in terms of cabinet or whether the totality of the public service, he told us enemies, Boko Haram agents are within. Now, when we are talking about under Muhammadu Buhari, 4 experiences of airplane crash. Now, this time, we are talking of another one under President Tinubu. I always ask myself, what is it that the federal government of Nigeria, yesterday or today, has done about dealing with the enemies within in government? I am saying that, I am hypothesizing that the moment, any time the Nigerian military troops are going for an operation, they always have this ambush. Why is it so? So if you do not want to deal with this critical dynamic of airplane ambush. I will not be surprised if tomorrow again we have another crash. We need to look at that dimension. That's the first point. The second point, before coming to what the ECOWAS will do, Ambassador Joe Keshi told us about 3 critical points that we should not ignore, so that in explaining what the ECOWAS should be doing can be understood in context. He did tell us that the chiefs, the defense chiefs, ECOWAS defense chiefs, what is it that they told the people? What is it that they told the community citizens? They didn't tell us what was agreed to in the Accra summit. The Accra summit said, and the quintessential plenipotentiary that Joe Keshi is, told us that they were supposed to come up with a detailed plan, real scenarios that are likely to be workable in the event of military invasion, and that this detailed plan was meant to be taken to their principals back home for further deliberation and final decision. But what is it that they told us? They are talking about D-Day. They are talking about a date that they are likely to go and invade. I am not surprised in any way, because in this type of situational realities, soldiers, generals may want to go to war for various reasons. But that is not what the people are saying. If you are now asking me, for instance, how can the ECOWAS come out, quote and unquote, clean and forge forward? Well, let me tell you 2 other points that Ambassador Keshi raised. He said that in Niger, he invited that our sagacious minds should be diverted to what obtains on the ground. He did remind us that we do have United States troops on ground. United States has a military base there. So does France. Their troops are there. He asked the question, could it have been that these Franco-American troops are, for whatever reason, sleeping? Then they wouldn't know that there will be a coup. Or why is it that they are not interested to make available the troops on ground to ensure, to prevent, or now that the coup has become a fait accompli, to do something concrete? Why is it now that they will want ECOWAS to do the business? More fundamentally, Joe Keshi has it that, why not ask yourself the rationale behind the appointment or the nomination of an ambassador designate, quote and unquote, with the mandate not to quickly go and present her letters of credence. That's Kathleen Fritzburg. Now, why? Whoever sits down to find answers to this will discover that the Yoruba people have always said again, I love Yoruba proverbs. What is behind 6 is more than 7. Now, when you look at the issues he raised, you will discover that whoever is talking about a D-Day, which is unnecessary, You don't have to tell anybody you are going to invade on so date. Even if it is known to you alone, there's no big deal about that. The issue is that during the time of Yakubu Gowon, when the civil war was to break out, he simply said, in fact, he sent policemen to go and capture Odumegwu Ojukwu. He was talking about 14 days. But 14 days became synonymous with 30 months of civil war. So this situation is not different. Now, to answer the specific question, what is the way out? What should the ECOWAS be doing? I think as it is now, even though, let me take off from Ambassador Keshi's point that sanctions can work, and that it even worked in the case of Niger. To a great extent, I agree with him. But in many cases, sanctions hardly work. And where they work, the impacts became counter-sanctions, all right, in the spirit of reciprocal treatment. Now, for instance, on Niger, the sanction, Nigeria decided, for instance, to cut off electricity supply. And the people are suffering, they are in darkness. We can look at that as an impact of a sanctionary measure. But the issue is that Algeria immediately said, look, they will provide security gratis. Nigeria is being paid for supply of electricity. Now another country is saying, take time, we will do this for you. So the sanction has impact temporarily. What should the ECOWAS do in this type of situation? One, they must learn to caution their defense chiefs. Defense chiefs are instruments of policy. It is not their business, you know, to be pontificating outside. The second point, ECOWAS must learn how not to adopt a policy of offensive-defensive strategy without preparing for it. They started by saying, we give you 7 days ultimatum. You are giving an ultimatum to a sovereign state. You need to differentiate always between recognition of government and recognition of states. Yeah. States are there permanently. So whether Bazoum is there, whether is out, Niger state will always be there. But the government may not always be there. So when you are dealing with this type of situation, you must know the targeted audience so that you don't make reckless statements.
Certainly, I think
ECOWAS.
Professor, I know I'll come back to you for the third one because we're still talking about Niger. We still have that time, but we'll take a moment and I'll come back to you, Professor Akinterinwa, and of course, Yemi Adamolekun and Professor Awarawo, my in-house analyst. Take a moment. I'll be back shortly. Stay with us. Welcome back. It's our home stretch here on This Is Live. I still have my guest, Professors Akinterinwa and Awarawo and Yemi Adamolekun. I'll let us take just a minute to round off on Nigeria so that we can actually go into some other issues. And before the break, Professor Akinterinwa was going to give us the third stretch of the solutions to what we're dealing with in Nigeria. I'll start with him before I come back to Professor Awarawo and Yemi. Professor Akinterinwa.
Thank you. I will quickly, within the time limit, raise three quick points there. The third one is that ECOWAS must avoid any military intervention by itself or by France or the Americans, because there are some reports, confirmed or unconfirmed, that France is planning airstrikes on Niger. Whether it is true, whether it is not, but a rumor always has an origin. They must prevent that type of unnecessary attack that can, you know, worsen the situation on ground. Now, on the issue of the 3 years giving by Tiani. Ambassador Keshi rightly pointed out that it's just a bargaining point. I agree to a great extent, but two critical issues are raised. The first one is whether emphasis should be placed on returning Bazoum to power, or whether emphasis should be placed on return to constitutional order. For me, I think there's a change of government in Niger already. The coup d'etat is already a fait accompli, meaning now that emphasis should now be placed on returning to constitutional order. And now 3 years, you can negotiate, you can do that. But this will be largely determined by the extent to which the putschis, the coupists, will be prepared to protect Franco-American interests there. Finally, you see, the Nigerian Political Science Association, as well as the platform of Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, Through My Eyes, they discussed the issue of we should be giving priority. Is it democracy or development? In this case, democracy, if you now say give priority to democracy, what about development? We believe that development is an ultimate goal. Democracy is simply an instrument of it. In conclusion, anything that has the potential to bring disintegration not only to the ECOWAS, but to Africa, and to the ugly removal of President Tinubu should be avoided. Therefore, ECOWAS will not be an instrument of setback. It should be an instrument of regional integration, unity, economic cooperation as it was established in 1975. That is what I will recommend for now.
Yeah, maybe before I come to Professor Awarawa, you know, this is not new to you, talking about complaints of citizens and pushback that we have seen citizens, and some of these are what resonate with Nigerians. So how best can African leaders, especially those in the West African bloc, can ensure that democracy is sustained and the good of democracy is felt by the people, and we stop talking about coups or no coups?
Interesting. Ambassador Keshi made the point, which I thought was really spot on, when you were talking about the protest for and against. I mean, it's kind of common knowledge that protests can be orchestrated. At the right price, you get the right type of people that you're looking for. You can specify, you want a young person, old people, you want them naked. You will get, specify the type of protest that you want, you will get. And that's not to say that they're not legitimate protests. As someone who does organize protests, there are legitimate protests where people come because they believe in the issue, but protests can also be orchestrated. So from Niger to Kano to different parts where we've seen protests popped up, there's always been that sort of element of, and I think there was also Ambassador Keshi that was talking about it, that even a football game doesn't get a stadium full. And people will now come on their own because they want to support a military government, that likely not of their own free will. But I think at the heart of it is what Professor Akinterinwa kind of ended with, is this issue of legitimacy and the issue of service. Look, across West Africa, literally across the world, citizens engage people who they think are acting in their own best interest. And what we've seen on the continent over and over again are political leaders who the citizens are a means to an end. So if you say we have a democracy, so we need citizens to vote, okay, what do we need to get them to vote for us? Not really because we're trying to serve them or trying to make their lives better. And we see it. I mean, the numbers are there. Nigeria's multidimensional poverty has increased, and it's across the continent. I mean, we could probably, Mo Ibrahim, I don't know if he awarded a prize this year. So even if we use that very minor measure of what are African leaders doing, when African leaders are unable to get a prize that offers them money in perpetuity once they leave office because of what they did while they were in office, that says a lot. So I think part of the conversation we need to have is that I mean, there's a popular saying that the best form of government is a democracy, despite whatever the challenges are, obviously not perfect, are within that. So when the democracy is not performing, the answer is not, which is what some Nigerians are beginning to say, that, oh, maybe that's what we need in Nigeria. No, it's still a democracy because that's the only form of government that allows citizens to engage, allows citizens to have a voice. But what is consistent across the continent, and if we use Nigeria as an example, is that we've had such a dearth of good leadership, and we're not intentional about teaching citizens that they have power. Everything political leaders do is to disempower citizens. So by the time you're spending time thinking about how you're going to pay for school, thinking about fuel subsidy or lack thereof, the cost of living, and 20 gazillion security issues that you have to deal with, the thought that you actually can hold, and then you have people in political office who continue literally to rub it into your face that you can't do anything. And so recently, Nigeria, we had the Senate president, first, can the poor breathe, making fun of the poor. So the fact that, I mean, we know these things, but it was good to hear them say it, that they get a stipend for going on recess. So you go on a 6-week holiday and you get 2 million naira. And it's something they're sharing proudly while telling Nigerians to tighten their belt. So in summary to your question, until we are intentional about teaching ourselves that citizens have power, and then we choose political leaders that are representative of what we want, we will continue to have these challenges, both within the context of a democracy and when the military decide that they can do better.
Let me, thank you, Yemi. Let me quickly bring in Professor Awarawa, and it has to do with the developing stories. President Bola Tinubu has assured the people of that there won't be any kind of increment in the price of petrol. He's also said that some form of palliative will be given to states. Professor Awarawa, now we're talking about how people can get by and see what form of sort of, you know, like many Nigerians, palliative is getting to be a cliche, so let's run away from it. Some kind of assistance or succor to the everyday Nigerian. What's your reading of how best this can be managed? Because almost everyone we've spoken to seem to be having an issue with trust and some kind of transparency.
And they are right. They are right because history, favors their pessimism. You recall that in 2016, just about a year after President Buhari was sworn in, the states were struggling to pay salary. Some were owing 8 months, 7 months, 8 months, even some up close to a year. And the president decided to, give some loans to states that were, badly affected, so those, those salaries could be cleared, and so that the people would not die of hunger. Of course, we know what happened at the end of the day. Many of the states didn't use those monies to pay salary. They diverted them to other things, and later they came and said, oh, there was one project somewhere that was so important, and we decided to use a large chunk of the money. So, and of course, at the end of the day, those projects, they couldn't really point to anything concrete to establish that the money was used judiciously. So people are skeptical about transparency in the way these monies will be used. They are right, because many governors have not been above board in economic management and in handling resources like this. And that is what needs to change, really. The money is already too small. It's small, but as small as it is, let it do something for the very, very poor. Somebody was talking about, Dr. Chizia Uspo was talking about what register would they. There's actually a register. There's an authentic register. There are bank deposits and things like that that can be used to determine the very, very poor who will benefit from this. So the problem is how honest and transparent the governors will be to use these funds judiciously. The second thing I want to say about that is, if you ask me really, the money is small. If I were governor, I would just use probably 1 billion or so to just focus on the very, very poor, and use the rest to help micro enterprises. Instead of just giving somebody fish that will finish one day, Why don't you just teach him how to fish? You recall that in 2006, when Professor Mohamed Yunus won the Nobel Prize, you know, for peace. It was because of the small money he made available to hundreds of thousands in Indonesia. And, you know, the money, the small funds he gave out, helped to transform people's lives, helped to reduce poverty tremendously. That was what, you know, won him the Nobel Prize for Peace in 2006. What that shows is that when these micro enterprises are assisted, 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 here and there, it's a better way to intervene socially than just giving 5,000, 10,000 to people that will finish overnight. So these are the things that, first, the government needs to be sincere. They need to be honest and transparent. They need to be concerned with the plight of the poor. And of course, the small chunk of it should be used. Then the bulk of it should be used to focus on micro enterprises. And of course, we know the African social system. Once one person is doing fairly well, he takes care of up to 20 people. And that is the way we can genuinely actually tackle poverty, instead of just sharing 5,000 and all that. So the governors, they have a whole lot in their hands. Let us see what they do this time. And we hope they will do things differently from what they did in the past.
Go to Akinterinwa. I come back to Yemi, because Yemi, you and your team, you've always tried to follow the money and follow and monitor some key policies here. Listen to Professor Awarawo. The fears and the worries of many Nigerians are well placed, and he's also giving a sense of how he thinks that 5 billion could be invested by states. Speak to us on what you think can be done to the extent that the very, very you know, needy person in these states are not shortchanged.
I think a starting point, as Professor Awarawo said, is clarity around numbers. So there's a good friend of mine that jokes that we don't know how to count in Nigeria. So our elections are drama-filled, our voters register drama-filled. Census, we haven't had one since 2006. Social register that was lauded under Buhari. Miriam Wise, who was in charge of it, I think got several awards for the work that they'd done. Now, obviously, it would not be a perfect register, but was it a register that spoke to the poor, the poorest of the poor? Some people think so. I mean, I haven't seen the register, I haven't really interrogated it, so I wouldn't say categorically, but there was evidence at the time that it was a register that was, the process and the methodology was quite clear. But I think the consistent issue is also transparency. So we don't have a census. So the social register, I'm not quite sure who's on it. We don't know who's on it. It's not something that that is explained enough and enough and enough so people understand. And I think we also live in such a low trust environment that it makes it very difficult for people to believe it. And so you have same party, APC, but a new administration comes in and they themselves said the social register is flawed. So how do you expect citizens to believe it if within the same party they're accusing themselves that it's a flawed register? Yeah. So a starting register would be a good place to start. Yeah. Secondly, in the absence of a national census, I don't see why states are not doing their own census. You can't plan for your state if you don't know who lives in your state. It's one of the legacies of Babatunde Fashola in Lagos. Unfortunately, his successors haven't continued it to the same degree. But at that level, it would have helped the states be able to track who is in the state and who's at what level and what kind of provisions do they need to provide. Right. Now, with the palliatives, I was looking at what the governor, the chairman of the National Governors Forum, they're fighting amongst themselves around what that means. The money is supposed to be refunded, or part of it is supposed to be refunded. But I think to also show why there is a low trust, I'll end with this. Yeah. There are 36 states in this country. The number of voters or people in multidimensional poverty vary across states. Why would you give every state exactly the same amount of money? Why would you give every state exactly the same amount of grain? So just as fuel subsidy that wasn't well thought out in what do you do after you've removed it, even the palliatives. I mean, we've been talking about fuel subsidy removal forever. We've been talking about running elections forever. The fact that this administration wasn't even prepared enough to have thought through this, to have clear plans around what they want to do, says a lot. The governors are now fighting and disagreeing amongst themselves, and that's really very unfortunate, where the focus should be on citizens.
I think one of the big points you just raised there, Yemi, is that states should, as a matter of urgency, also do their census. You can't plan without knowing the numbers. Now, speaking of numbers, let me bring in Professor Akinterinwa, because in Canada, they already have the numbers, and that's why they know that 15,000 households have been ordered to evacuate in Canada's British Columbia as firefighters battle raging wildfires that have set homes ablaze. Professor Akinterinwa, the officials are numbstuck, and everyone is actually shocked at what exactly this is about. We understand that these are trying moments for people around that axis. Speak to us about the effect of this, if this has anything to do with climate change.
Well, scientifically speaking, there is no way one can run away from climate change in this particular situation. Apart from the wildfire disaster in the British Columbia in Canada, you see, the weather has been unnecessarily too hot in many parts of Europe and America, Canada inclusive. But when we talk about climate change, nobody takes it seriously, especially here in Nigeria. We don't take it seriously. Let me give you two instances here. Instance one is in Netherlands. The Netherlands has been adjudged to be below sea level. And they are now saying that with climate change, with global warming, rise in the level of water is expected. And since Netherlands has had an experience before, Netherlands now set up a committee to look at what is most likely to happen 99 years to come. So they have a permanent research committee looking at how to prevent, the country from being subsumed by water. They thought that during the Second World War, by building walls, they will be covered, protected, but that has not been the case. So this time, they have a committee looking at 99 years to come. In Nigeria, reports have shown that Lagos is also below sea level, about 4 feet below. What is it that we are doing? Now,
Reclaiming land.
They are reclaiming land. Now, climate change is a problem for all. I think what I will just simply say is that the wildfire in Canada has a resultant effect from climate change, and we should learn lessons from that by preparing for
Okay, well,
some situations in the future.
as we learn lessons from that, let's quickly bring in Professor Awarawo to weigh in on this, if we can do this in a minute. Professor Awarawo.
We have always had, let's get things clear, wildfires have always been there, even when climate change issues were not there. What has happened is that these things have become exacerbated by climate change. And of course, all the efforts to ensure that climate change does not, consume mankind, must be followed through. And we are happy with all the multilateral efforts that have been made. Several conferences held, and even though many states have not been able to keep to what they are committed to in those summits, it has influenced action across the world. So what needs to be done is to step up. Since, of course, we can see that humanity is in danger of being consumed by inaction towards the climate change issue. So that should galvanize everybody across the world to do its own part so that climate change issues can be reduced to the barest minimum.
Well, it's a fine place for us to say many thanks for being such a nice company. Yemi Adamolekun, Professors Awarawo and Akinterinwa. Many thanks for being there for us as always. And to you watching, it's a beautiful Sunday. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.